Peter Credlin, live on Sky News Australia.
Good evening, happy Boxing Day and welcome to the show. I'm Caroline Marcus, filling in for Peter Credlin. Let's take a look at tonight's top stories. Here's what's coming up on the program. Anthony Albanese slammed for his contradicting messages over the war with Hamas as pro-Palestinian stunts cause concern back home. Also tonight, TikTok under fire over another potential privacy breach. Is your data safe? I'll have those details shortly. Plus, the Christmas party that has left locals disgusted. But first, Sky News can reveal New South Wales Police is monitoring a Sydney mosque that is hosting a commemorative service for a Lebanese terrorist killed in fighting with Israel. On Christmas Eve, Hezbollah, which is a designated terrorist organisation in Australia, announced the death of 6 operatives between December 21st and 23rd, according to the Israeli Mir Amit Intelligence and Terrorism Information Centre. Now, one of these operatives was Hussein Ibrahim Salameh, also known as Nasser, who comes from South Lebanon. He was reportedly the 124th Hezbollah fighter to be killed since October 8, when the Shiite militia group, which is based in Lebanon and backed by Iran, began its operations against Israel. In recent days, Hezbollah has continued its attacks on both IDF and civilian targets on Israel's northern border, claiming responsibility for 19 attacks. In response, the IDF has attacked Hezbollah targets in South Lebanon with artillery fire and airstrikes. Now, it's not yet clear where or how exactly this Hezbollah fighter, Nasser, died, but a notice posted on the Facebook page for Al Rahman Mosque in the South Sydney suburb of Kingsgrove says a memorial service will be held here in Australia, thousands of miles away, on Thursday evening. Sky News is told this line in Arabic refers to Nasser as a martyr. Now, this mosque, Al Rahman, has formed. It has already hosted at least 2 services in October, memorialising a number of other Hezbollah fighters. At one of these ceremonies, the Australian reported the Imam, Sheikh Yusuf Naba, told a packed crowd that 3 of the men were martyrs, and he would not be deterred by any criticism by the media in continuing to commemorate the militants. He also reportedly told the congregants that Israel's attacks on Gaza was a plan to eradicate the Palestinian territories. Well, I have news for him. If that was the plan, this war would have been over on October 8. Israel certainly has the capability, just not the will. But back to this week's service. Sheikh Naba has clearly made good on that promise to continue commemorating terrorists. And Jewish groups are understandably deeply worried, as we all should be. The president of the Australian Jewish Association, Dr. David Adler, said of this latest event, all reasonable Australians should be shocked and concerned that we have a local community which appears to empathise with Hezbollah terrorists. Supporting a prescribed terrorist organisation is a crime, and we call on counter-terrorism police to urgently investigate. The problem is authorities seem to be too hamstrung by our weak laws to do very much at all. New South Wales Police told me it is aware of this week's service and is monitoring. The Department of Home Affairs said in a statement, the Australian government is concerned about any promotion of terrorist organisations and that it urges communities in Australia to remain respectful. Premier Chris Minns is on leave, but a New South Wales government spokesperson told us anyone who's looking at holding a protest or commemoration service needs to be careful that they're not celebrating an organisation that's a prescribed terrorist organisation by the Commonwealth Government. If for no other reason, then you may be breaching laws that are in place from the federal level. New South Wales Police will not tolerate hate speech or incitement to violence by any group in our state. Well, about those federal laws, the Federal Criminal Code Act doesn't mention whether commemorating a service for a member of a terror group would actually breach the act. It does make special mention that association with a terror group does not include family or that which occurs as part of public religious worship. So that seems to be a clear loophole. In budget estimates in October, the very question about whether a Hezbollah commemoration service can constitute an offence was put directly to AFP Deputy Commissioner Ian McCartney. His response? That the threshold is fairly high, but the federal police will, again that phrase, continue to monitor. Well, a fat lot of good that does the Australian public, alarmed by the idea of hundreds of mourners whipped up into supporting jihadism. Meantime, the mosque did not respond to a request to comment, and this sheikh has previously called on the Premier to resign over his reaction to previous services. I'll be in the chair all week, and I promise we too here at Credlin will be monitoring. And quickly, on Christmas Eve, pro-Palestinian protesters hijacked the televised family event Carols in the Candlelight in Melbourne, broadcast on the Nine network. Here they are.
No, it's okay.
Caroling kids are dying in Gaza!
That microphone has now.
That's okay.
I'm so sorry. Thank you so much.
That's okay. We've got this one here working.
It's all good. Everybody, it's okay. It's all good. Thank you, everybody. Relax, settle down. Everyone's allowed to have they're allowed to have their moment. They're allowed to have their time.
Yes, peaceful protest is a democratic right in this country, and so it should remain. But I take issue with what Nine host David Campbell says there. He was wrong that protesters should be allowed to have a moment when that moment entails terrifying children performing on stage and in the audience. These protesters crossed a line. Those poor children had to be escorted off the stage in a panic. They would have had no idea what was happening. We now know that the woman who stormed the stage has been arrested over the concealment of a controlled weapon. A weapon at a Carols event. That's hardly peaceful. But aside from all that, how utterly imbecilic do you have to be to think that the best way to get your message across is to gatecrash a Christmas family event? These sorts of guerrilla tactics, as they're being described today, will do nothing but turn people off a cause. It's the type of protesting style favoured by radical climate activists throughout the year who have disrupted commuters and industry, not to mention seriously endangered themselves and wasted police resources by partaking in such Darwin Award-winning behaviour as dangling themselves off bridges and cranes. We are now being warned to expect much more such peaceful protests from the pro-Palestinian crowd over the festive period, New Year's Day and Australia Day being singled out in particular. And Australians are jack of it. Now to the latest out of the Middle East as the fighting in Gaza continues and the death toll on both sides continues to increase. There are reports today that Israel's war cabinet have met to discuss a three-step plan put forward by Egypt to end the war. The proposal, which was seen by the Wall Street Journal, reportedly calls for an initial pause in fighting to allow for a release of Israeli hostages, including the remaining children, women and elderly, in exchange for about 140 Palestinian prisoners, many of these terrorists. Also proposed after that, the formation of a transitional government for Gaza and the West Bank, made up of a mix of Palestinian factions, which would include Hamas. Now, it's hard to see Israel ever accepting any deal that includes Hamas retaining any power whatsoever over the Gaza Strip. And Hamas, for its part, recently rejected another ceasefire offer and has broken a previous temporary ceasefire, so not exactly a partner for peace. It all comes as the Australian ambassador has accused Prime Minister Anthony Albanese of sending mixed messages over the war with Hamas. In a rare interview with the Australian newspaper, Mr. Maimon said the Prime Minister understands that Hamas cannot be part of future governance in Gaza, yet supports a ceasefire. These are contradictory messages. He also said the Jewish state's fight against terrorism has been held to a different standard to Australia's own operations in Afghanistan, and lamented that Israeli citizens do not feel safe in this country. Joining me now to discuss this and much more is the past chair of Foreign Affairs and Defence Committee, Michael Danby. Michael, thank you for your time. We've seen Labor, a party you previously represented as an MP, do an about-face on its support for a ceasefire this month. A Hamas leader even released a video praising Australia for its new direction. Does the ambassador have a point?
Well, it's shameful that Hamas was praising our policy. UK and other countries abstained on that ceasefire vote, and Australia should have as well. Of course, we've changed our policy. Of course, the ambassador's right. Of course, this is a different kind of Labor government than ones of the past. Can you ever imagine a Hawke, Beazley, Shorten or Keating government doing this? It wouldn't have been so. A unilateral ceasefire, as Penny Wong and Anthony Albanese know very well, means that Hamas stays in control of the Gaza Strip. Imagine living next door, Caroline, or any of your listeners, to these rapists and murderers in control of a state apparatus. It's impossible. Unfortunately, that's why part of the Egyptian peace plan, which is well meant, and the Egyptians are playing a constructive role, just won't fly.
So you don't see this proposal from Egypt getting up, do you? I mean, what chance is there of this war ending beyond the next few months?
Well, for the reasons you outlined in another part of the introduction was that Hamas is refusing to release further hostages, even for a pause, and that means that we can't go forward with the first two parts of the Egyptian plan, let alone the part where it says Israel must withdraw entirely and have a Palestinian committee of experts, which includes both the PA and Hamas. Hamas won't be left in control of the Gaza Strip. There's a consensus of 95% of people across the Israeli political spectrum that says no. We can have Palestinians, we can have international authorities, we can have Egyptians, anything, but there will not be an organisation that posed that civilisational threat that it did on October 7. I mean, it's all very well for some people who've, including been on this network during the day, saying that Australia and the international coalition lost the war in Afghanistan because we couldn't suppress the Taliban. But Australia and New Zealand and the United States and Canada weren't living next door to the Taliban. That's what we're proposing that the Israelis do, that they live next door to these people who did the most appalling things on October the 7th, which we can't avert our eyes from. And in the meantime, they won't release 100 plus hostages who were there, including the terrible fate of those two babies, 4 and 11 months, and all of the women who've been, in my fear, been subject to sexual violence from these beasts. In Hamas.
The Bibas children, it's so heartbreaking. To me, they're really the face of this hostage situation, and to hear those reports that they may have been killed, which have come out from Hamas. I mean, we know that Hamas has given wrong information about that previously. But also, Michael, I mean, this idea from this peace proposal that Hamas can even work with other Palestinian groups like Fatah, when we know that's not the case, it just doesn't seem pragmatic.
When they took over in Gaza from Fatah after that election, where you have to admit they were supported by the majority of local Palestinians in Gaza, they threw Fatah officials off the roof, along with gay people. Now, the idea that they can, enjoy happy, clappy times, singing Kumbaya and running the Gaza Strip is, nonsense, and is just putting off the conflict and making it worse. What we need to do is to see Hamas defeated, and I define defeat as more of their militants being killed, including the leadership Deif and Sinwar in the Strip. Then Israel will go to quieter operations and then seek an international plan led by the Arab nations to run the Gaza Strip with a committee of experts. There's a very good bloke who's the Prime Minister of the Palestinian Authority, who's not a crook, unlike Mohammed Abbas, who's not a person who denies the Holocaust, unlike Mohammed Abbas, and who's not a mass murdering rapist and killer like Sinwar or Deif or any of these people who run Hamas. Together with international support from the Arab world, he could run a committee of experts. It'd have to be undemocratic and non-elected for a few years, but there'll be no Hamas running the Gaza Strip, despite the best intentions of Egypt. By the way, Caroline, they hate the Muslim Brotherhood because they nearly ruined Egypt, and Hamas is the Palestinian arm of the Muslim Brotherhood.
Yeah, I mean, it's very idealistic. People who call for ceasefire and, don't understand all the complexity of the situation. Before I let you go, Michael, I want to get your reaction to a story I brought our viewers at the top of the show about another memorial service being planned this week in Sydney for a Hezbollah terrorist. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I was on the Intelligence Committee of Federal Parliament, along with being chairman of its Foreign Affairs and Defence Committee. And there's a very involved process. ASIO recommends to the Intelligence Committee, and the Intelligence Committee recommends to the Attorney General different groups that are prescribed as terrorist organisations. It's very serious, and all of the organs of the Australian state are involved in it. And I tell that leader of that mosque in Sydney, Hezbollah is a prescribed terrorist organisation by effort of the Australian Parliament. Very serious. And the Director General of ASIO says that some of the demos that the Palestinians have been having are a safety valve, but memorial services for Hezbollah fighters are very dangerous. And what's the next step beyond this? We have to call a line across some of this. They're doing all the demos in Chadstone and in Federation Square and running convoys through Bondi and Botany. Caroline's got to be called a stop. It's being run better by Minns in New South Wales. He's calling a stop to more of this. But in Victoria, these people are just dominating public spaces. They may not be Hezbollah funerals, but you can't go to Chadstone or Federation Square or RMIT without these people pushing and harassing and shouting and screaming at people.
And it's so counterproductive, isn't it? Okay, Michael Danby, thank you so much for your time. It's been really insightful. Let's get to more of the day's top stories now. Joining me is former Victorian Party President Michael Kroger and Liberal Senator Anne Ruston. Thank you both for your time, and I hope you had a wonderful Christmas. Now, the Prime Minister has ruffled feathers among some of the top figures of the Yes campaign after he claimed that the failed referendum was not a personal loss for him because he was not Indigenous. One figure from the Yes campaign was quoted as saying the blacks did the work for 7 years and Labor killed it. Michael, is Anthony Albanese dodging accountability for this fail?
Well, not only that, but, Caroline, when you look at his recent performance, this guy's just losing the plot everywhere, isn't he? I mean, he supported Israel at the beginning, but now he's gone off them. He's lost control of the immigration process, the borders, and now this bizarre statement how it's not a loss for him. I mean, he was the one that put up this extreme referendum. He and Dreyfus should have said to the more extreme elements of the Aboriginal community, we're not going with, a referendum which is at the extreme end of the options, which was this whole notion of being able to make representations to the entirety of government and the public service. So the loss is his loss. It was his decision. And I've found people today bewildered at what he's saying. But, as I've been saying on Sky recently, this bloke's becoming the worst Prime Minister in my lifetime, beyond worse than Whitlam, worse than Rudd, and today's bizarre comment is just another example of why that's true.
Senator, surely if there had been a win, Mr Albanese would have been completely claiming the credit for that himself and his party. But what does this say about Labor? They say that they're closing the gap on Indigenous issues. Do you see it that way?
Well, quite clearly, all you have to do is look at the results to see that they're not closing the gap. But, you know, for a Prime Minister who has invested so much political capital in this voice to then sort of almost say nothing to see here, it's got nothing to do with me, he's now left himself with no real agenda to move forward in terms of dealing with the issues that are confronting some of the most vulnerable in our Indigenous communities, some of the most vulnerable Australians in total. And so, you know, we know that some of the most practical, on-the-ground solutions to helping Indigenous Australians are the things that work, not some Canberra-based voice that's being dictated from the bureaucracy. It simply was never going to work. But, you know, for him to walk away and somehow say that this isn't important to him and it's not a loss to him, I think is extraordinarily insensitive and extraordinarily disrespectful for a whole heap of people that work really, really hard. And it was his actions and his belligerence and his persistence on this extreme version of the referendum that ultimately killed the thing in the first place.
Very true. Let's move on to another big topic dominating the headlines today. One of Australia's largest health networks, St Vincent's, still does not know if hackers stole private medical data almost a week after it became the target of a cybersecurity breach. Now, Senator, as the shadow health and aged care spokeswoman, I know you've been critical over how Labor have handled this. Why?
Well, where are they? I mean, they've been completely missing in action. We've had sort of one comment from Anthony Albanese on Friday that he was going to get a briefing some 4 days after the supposed or this attack has taken place. We've seen nothing from the Health Minister when potentially hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people have had their could have had their sensitive health and medical records breached. And they're completely missing in action. I mean, they seem to have just gone on holidays and completely forgotten about they actually have a job as a government to govern 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. You don't get to take Christmas off when these sorts of things happen. So I am very critical that we're sitting here over a week later. We still don't really know what's going on. I don't know how much help has been provided to St Vincent's, who are obviously trying to work on this. And we've got a minister that's on holidays and a Prime Minister who was going to get a briefing some days after the event occurred. Well,
hackers certainly don't seem to take Christmas holidays. But, Michael, how concerning for patients is it that St Vincent's is still unsure of what data has been stolen?
Well, look, they should be very concerned because these are people's health records. They are incredibly sensitive and no one would want anyone's private health records published for very good reasons. But, you know, as the Senator has just said, you know, hospitals are not experts in cybersecurity. They're experts in healthcare. They're not in the business of cybersecurity. They do their best. But ultimately you need the federal government, not the state government, you need the federal government to be in charge of cybersecurity in this country. And once again, where's Claire O'Neill, the Home Affairs Minister? And by the way, you can tell a government's in decline when no one wants to be responsible for bad news. Early on in a government, people front up, they take responsibility, they say, mate, I stuffed up, I'll go out there and front the press. So you've always got Albo now, who doesn't want to be anywhere near any bad news. Those High Court decisions on the refugees being let out, he doesn't want to know anything about it. You know, a very brief press conference about this. Where's the Health Minister? MIA. Claire O'Neill, missing in action. So basically you've got all these ministers, staffers ringing each other saying, my minister's not going out today, your minister has to go out. My minister's not going out, get the Prime Minister to go out. And no one wants to front the cameras because it's another enormous stuff up that the federal government should be doing something about, but they have no idea what to do.
It's a very convenient time to suddenly be unavailable. But Christmas holiday period,
unavailable.
They can just easily come up with that excuse. Let's move on to Australian cricketer Usman Khawaja, who is back making headlines today, not for his cricket playing, but taking to social media to call out the International Cricket Council for what he says are double standards. It comes after the opener was initially blocked from wearing shoes with the messages, all lives are equal and freedom is a human right. Today, he's worn shoes with his two daughters' name on them instead while opening the batting for the Boxing Day Test. He says that's a reminder of innocent kids who are dying. He says he wanted to still make a statement about human rights while not segregating parts of the community. Michael, do you think he's achieved that with this stunt? And what do you make of the original ICC block?
Well, the original ICC block was correct. This is an unfortunate piece of behaviour by Mr. Khawaja. No condemnation of Hamas, by the way. I mean, if Hamas surrendered tomorrow, the whole Middle East, the whole war in Gaza would be over. So he perhaps should have had on his shoes, Hamas surrender, and then there'd be no more bloodshed. But has he done that? No, he's done this. I suggest to him, if he really wants to make a point, he stands down from the Australian cricket team and doesn't use his privileged position as a well-paid, highly paid Australian cricketer to lecture us about politics. Stand down from the team, Usman, if you really want to make your point. But as I said, the real point to make is say something about Hamas, the Free Palestine demonstrators. Stop being anti-Semitic and anti-Jewish and call for Hamas to surrender. That's what really should be happening in this country. But we see all of this double talk, double speak, basically from people, not Khawaja, but generally speaking, all these Palestinian demonstrators, anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish, never have anything to say about Hamas, and never a word spoken by any of these people during the entirety of the Iran-Iraq war, when we were getting rid of Al-Qaeda, Islamic State, nothing they've got nothing to say about Arabs killing Arabs in Yemen, 150,000 killed. They've got nothing to say about that. You know the common thing in all of these Middle East disputes? Jews. They come out when there's a chance to criticise Jews, and need we say more?
I'm all too aware of that unfortunate fact, Michael. I think you're spot on there. But Anne, do you agree? Do you think that sport and politics should remain separate?
Well, I would love for sport and politics to remain separate. Unfortunately, we've seen so many actions of recent times that's brought them together, which is really disappointing. And, you know, if Mr. Khawaja wants to make a statement, he should do it as a private citizen. He should not use the platform that he's privileged to have as an elite Australian sports person. So I think it is really disappointing that we're seeing these messages and the platform of a great day at the cricket like today was, to actually be marred by this political interference that's being put forward by a great batsman, an incredible batsman. But, you know, I'd love to see politics and sport separated, but unfortunately I think that it's probably too late to unscramble that egg.
It's not just cricket anymore, is it? Okay, Michael Krogan, Anne Ruston, thank you so much. Coming up after the break, the Christmas cleanup that's left locals disgusted. Plus, social media giant TikTok under fire again over another potential breach of privacy. Welcome back to Credlin. Before we get to our panel, I wanted to bring you a clip from comedian Ricky Gervais's latest special, which has just dropped on Netflix. It's an incisive send-up of all things woke and politically correct, which I know Peter detests just as much as me and you do at home. Here is Gervais talking about the fashion for putting terms like anti-racist or anti-fascist in a Twitter bio.
Yeah, I'm not a fascist. It's an odd thing to just declare, isn't it, that you're not a fascist? We assume, don't we? You wouldn't go up to someone on the street and do that, would you? And go say, oh, by the way, I'm not a fascist. You know, it's like they protest too much. It's like going into a school and going, I'm not a pedo, so just forget I even mentioned it. So these kids are safe running around me. They can run around naked for all I care. I'm not a pedo, so...
And that, folks, was one of the safer jokes to play at 6 in the evening. Let's bring our next panel in now. Joining me is Sky News contributor Gemma Tognini and political commentator Alexander Volz. Thank you both and happy Boxing Day to you. Now, Sydney locals have slammed a raucous party at Bronte Beach yesterday where tens of thousands of mostly tourists flocked to the annual beach party event. The scenes this morning were appalling to say the least, with locals left with no choice but to clean up a staggering amount of rubbish, which some dubbed worse than a third world country. I think this isn't even the worst, these shots. Like, it gets even worse than that. It's crazy. Now, Gemma, while this isn't too different from the bomb site that is my home after the toddlers have been let loose, these tourists are paying thousands of dollars to visit our beautiful country just to trash it. Make it make sense.
Oh, it doesn't make sense at all, but I've got a couple of ideas. First of all, it's rather than being reflective of a third world country, it's actually reflective of a privileged first world country where a bunch of tourists and backpackers will, as you say, come to celebrate how beautiful. And Bronte Beach is stunning. It's my favourite Sydney beach. And you know that that's a high bar for me, Caroline, because I come from Perth, best beaches in Australia. And they just trashed the joint. And I've read some follow-up commentary and comments from the local council and those responsible for the space. And they're all very, well, it's a bit difficult because, you know, there's a couple of entry points. You know what, I remember COVID and I remember how heavily our actions were restricted. So I don't buy that excuse ever anymore from any municipality or any local government or any police organisation. They did a very good job of restricting us, thank you very much, during COVID, so hop to it. It's as simple as going, we know what this problem is, put some clever minds in a room and come up with a solution. The first of which would be provide bigger bins and more of them. That would be the very first thing to do. The second thing I would just say as an observation, again, it's not reflective of a third world country. It's reflective of a bunch of privileged visitors to this country who've flipped the bird at us and gotten so absolutely shirt-faced, and I used the rated G version there for you, Caroline.
Noted.
On Christmas Day, it's a family show, on Christmas Day, and just left all of their garbage behind. Well, sorry, we don't want you here if you're going to do that. Bugger off home and leave your garbage there.
Alexander, was this reminiscent of the Christmas Day that you had over the weekend?
Well, Caroline, you know, the Christmas Day I had over the weekend involved far too much food and far too much alcohol. But no, I did manage to take the 15 seconds it requires to put my rubbish in the bin. But look, I have absolutely nothing to add on that. I think Gemma has certainly got it all sewn up. So hear to that.
Well, good to hear you cleaned up after yourself. Now, independent MP Bob Katter has accused Qantas of being anti-Christian in a written complaint, saying that he was angered to hear no traditional Christmas carols inside one of their business class lounges. He then took a swipe at former CEO Alan Joyce, saying, so whilst Alan Joyce may be gone, his spirit clearly lives on. But one thing for sure, this spirit ain't the spirit of Australia. Gemma, is Qantas Airline a Grinch, or does Mr. Katter maybe need to loosen up a little bit with a few leftover eggnog?
Listen, I flew on Christmas Eve from the Sydney lounge, and I'm very lucky to be in the business lounge. I'm not in the chairman's lounge, so let's put that to one side. I'm definitely not that important. But I flew Christmas Eve, and I thought there was a lovely spirit of Christmas in the lounge in Sydney and on the flight, and the crew were wonderful. And I just don't know what Qantas he experienced, what level of Qantas he experienced, and whether he was flying out of Sydney or another city. I didn't, and I'm, as you know, Caroline, I'm a Christian, and I did not feel it was anti-Christian at all. I felt like it was a really beautiful, lovely time to fly. In fact, a couple of people were like, "Oh my God, you're taking your life into your own hands, flying on Christmas Eve with the threat of delay." But no, it was a wonderful experience. They got us to Perth safely. I got to spend Christmas with my family. I have nothing but praise for Qantas on this occasion.
Well, look, that can be rare on this program, but look, Christmas Day is certainly one of the cheaper times to fly, so I completely understand your decision there. Let's move on to something else. Australian brands are being urged to remove a tracking tool called Pixel from Chinese-owned TikTok amid more revelations today that it is harvesting Australians' data without their knowledge or consent. Shadow Cybersecurity spokesman James Patterson slammed the Albanese government's negligence on this front this afternoon.
It's highly likely that Australians who've never downloaded or viewed TikTok in their lives, might not have even heard of TikTok, have had their personal information harvested by this company, and that data could well be already in China. The Albanese government really needs to do much more, and there's dozens of recommendations that have been made to them to solve this problem with TikTok. Now, if those policies had been implemented, we might have known about this already, but because the Albanese government has failed to do so, we've had to rely on a private company and a newspaper organisation to bring these revelations to light.
Alexander, I'm way too old for TikTok, but you're a youngster, one of the youth, as they say. Tell me you're not on this, because I find this stuff frightening.
Caroline, I am not on TikTok, and I think what we would all benefit from is actually a wider spread government campaign to encourage us all to get off social media. You often hear politicians criticising data harvesting from social media organisations. Every internet website and organisation data harvests. Every time you get a notification that says, do you want to allow cookies or not, that's basically data harvesting. But we don't see politicians say, kids, switch off your mobile devices when you're using social media, because the reality is that social media is a political tool. And it doesn't matter to politicians, I think, at least it's not clear in their policy agenda, that social media is destroying the concentration levels of kids. TikTok in particular, I mean, it's only a couple of seconds before you scroll, whether you're interested or not. That's how debased we've turned ourselves into with social media. It's not good, because if you can't concentrate, you can't acquire skills. And if you can't acquire skills, you can't do anything professionally, and you're just useless. And unfortunately, you contribute to that growing phenomenon of the welfare state. So less social media across the board, and if it's just the case that TikTok is particularly egregious in its data harvesting, then that's even added incentive.
Oh, Gemma, look, Alexander is not wrong on a lot of those counts. It's probably why he was a composer at something like 8 years old, and we're sitting here doing this job. I know you are just as much into Instagram as I am, Gemma. Follow me at Caroline Marcus. Follow Gemma at Gemma Tonini. But look, this probe that Senator Patterson is calling for seems desperately needed. Do you think that we need to just ditch TikTok altogether before we even get to those other apps?
I like you, I'm not on TikTok, and it's not necessarily because I'm an old person, because I'm 50 now. It's just that the concerns about that particular app are proven, I think, to a greater degree than the others. And also, I'm not 12. And I think the other thing about TikTok as an app is the fact that, Alexander quite rightly points out, it's a political tool. It's used to push ideology. I understand it's one of the most concentrated places for dissemination of anti-Semitic material currently. I don't know where I read that. Please forgive me. I can't remember the source material for that at the moment. As well. Right. So broadly, I don't have a great deal of faith in this government's approach to these sorts of issues. Cyber, I mean, you had the story off the top of the program, Caroline, around the hospital breach. I don't have a great deal of confidence that they are taking this seriously. I don't think this is an app that serves our young people or our less young people particularly well. I'd like to see stronger action by the government, in particular relation to this app, but also in the cyber situation more broadly. It's a pretty big mountain to climb, but at least let's get started, right?
Absolutely. It's the next frontier, so we've got to tackle it. Gemma Tonini, Alexander Bolts, thank you both so much for your time. Now, coming up, the latest headlines in the US, including the country's migrant crisis that is intensifying, how that will play a part in the 2024 election. Plus, Harvard University in the spotlight again as the school's board is pressured to resign. Welcome back to the program. The migrant crisis in the US is intensifying after thousands set off on foot from Mexico in an effort to reach the United States border, just days before the Secretary of State Antony Blinken is due to discuss how to curb mass migration with Mexico's president. Joining me to discuss this and more is Sky News contributor Kosha Gada. Kosha, thanks for joining me. Merry Christmas to you.
Merry Christmas. Nice to be with you, Caroline.
Now, Kosha, the migrant crisis continues to be a major issue for the Biden administration.
It absolutely is. I mean, this issue alongside inflation, Caroline, is the one where he has been massively underwater, and the poll numbers continue to plummet. Something like 70% of Americans polled in the Real Clear Politics average poll disapprove of his handling of the border. And, more than half of Americans actually are very happy to have funding as required applied to securing the U.S. border, over and above securing other borders in foreign countries. You often see that juxtaposition because the U.S. taxpayer is getting fed up with U.S. involvement in foreign conflicts while you see this happening right at home. And the reason for that is there's, I think, three main layers. So one is national security. We don't know who is coming in, and there's no way it would even be possible to vet every single person in this when you see this magnitude of people coming in. The second is a practicality. You just cannot govern a country when there's a complete open border. And there's something like 30 to 40 million people in the United States right now have come in illegally. You can't govern a country that way. And I think the third is it just looks like a real moral failing because it's unfair to the millions of people who want to come in and do come in legally when you see this chaos, and it's not getting any better.
So how damaging do you think it will be for President Biden in the 2024 election? Or is it going to give Trump more of a bump since he was so hard on illegal immigration?
You know, I mean, based on those polling figures that I mentioned and just the video that we see, the footage that you're showing in the era of social media, everybody sees this. It would normally be very damaging because, like, one of the fundamental roles of any government is securing the border and keeping the homeland safe. And this, you know, is an abject failure at that. The issue is this is not a normal election. As you know, and we cover all the time, there's so much else going on between the legal peril that Trump is in and just the dynamics at play and the mechanics of how the election is run. So when in an old world an issue might have made a difference, I can't even say that right now just because the entire system, the way the election is conducted has kind of been turned upside down.
Yeah, who knows even if Trump will be able to run again at this point. But let's move on to the Harvard University saga. The board is now under pressure to resign after it stood by the university's president, Claudine Gay, following her train wreck testimony on anti-Semitism on the campus. Kosha, does the Ivy League school need a shake-up? And what do you think that this says about Harvard?
It says a lot. I think this saga is going to continue because if you just step back, you know, Harvard is one of the most important and powerful institutions in the world, just in terms of the influence that it has and the alumni network and the access that it grants you into the corridors of power around the world. And it's the most elite brand in the world. So I think that's where it's become this microcosm of this fight. What's interesting is that you're seeing the battlefield now really converge with two different segments that are very powerful. One is the donors, the ultra-high net worth donors that are the reason behind the $50 billion endowment fund that Harvard has, more than any other institution in the world. They're closing their checkbooks, money talks, and that's leading to a lot of pressure. On the flip side, you've got the DEI complex, as it's known, that have a lot of vested, protected interests that do not want to see that shakeup happen. Somebody like Claudine Gay sort of is a poster child of what that DEI complex stands for, and they're backing her. A lot of those people are, you know, backing her, and that's why she has escaped firing. And I think you're going to see that battlefield between those two power brokers continue. I don't know how it ends, though.
It'll be fascinating, and it's certainly not the only university. We've seen the Penn University president, Liz McGill, step down. We've seen pressure on MIT as well, one of the other universities, to make testimony. I want to just circle back, as they say, in the US especially. Donald Trump's lawyers, speaking of Trump, have asked an appeals court in Washington, D.C. to throw out charges that he sought to undo his 2020 election loss. Now, Trump says he's legally cloaked from liability for the actions he took while serving as president. Kosha, as you pointed out before, this fight continues for Trump. But how do you see this all playing out?
You know, it really does. This is just on the back of the Supreme Court ruling 2 days ago, where they rejected Special Counsel Jack Smith's request to expedite the Supreme Court taking a case, skipping the appellate court step and having them hear his case immediately. And most pundits and legal scholars believe that the only reason for that was that this is election interference, and he wanted to get that case tried and possibly Trump convicted before the election because it would muddy him up. Supreme Court declined that and said you've got to follow the process and go through the different layers of the court. So this is, I think, Trump's legal team just playing through that process and going to that middle layer, the appellate court, and making the argument that his legal team has been making, which is that the president has immunity from being tried on political decisions that were made when he was holding that office. And who knows, you know, how that's going to play out. But that's one of the cruxes of what's at play here. Do we want to live in a system, or was the system designed to allow the judicial branch to litigate actions and policies that the head of the executive branch made while they were in office? That's a slippery slope into a very dangerous path if we start litigating past presidents for different things, and that's sort of what his team is arguing. It's going to head up to the Supreme Court in the end anyway, and I think that's scary to many Americans in and of itself, that it's all hanging by a thread, but I think that's just where this is headed.
Kosha Gada, it's all fascinating. Thank you for bringing us the latest. Now, still to come, how much the cost of living crisis is hurting Australians. We'll speak to the Salvation Army next. Welcome back. Now, this time of year can be extremely difficult for many families, and over this holiday period, the cost of living crisis has seen many Australians seek support services for the first time. An estimated 3.7 million households are experiencing food insecurity and struggling to make ends meet. Fortunately, we have services such as the Salvation Army to alleviate some of these challenges. And joining me now is the General Manager of Community Fundraising at the Salvos, Andrew Hill. Andrew, thank you for your time and Merry Christmas to you.
Yeah, happy Christmas to you. Thank you so much for having me.
It's our pleasure. Look, how did your annual Christmas appeal go this year and what does it involve?
Well, fortunately, it's still going where we need to raise $25 million, and that appeal is open right to the end of this year. So we're very, very close, and we're asking Australians to still dig deep and go to salvationarmy.org.au right now and donate. So we've seen the Australian public be amazingly generous, not just with financial donations through our website and through the mail, but the gift of food and toys to our centres has been absolutely overwhelming, and it's really done a lot to people who are really struggling.
That's so great to hear. Australians can be so generous, so it is wonderful to get that news from you. How many families do you think the appeal has helped so far? I know it's not finished, but so far.
We've definitely helped tens of thousands of families. We've distributed over 250,000 toys and gifts to families. Tens of thousands of meals and hampers. We've had Christmas meals at our centres all around Australia, from Brisbane to Burnie and Tasmania, all around Australia. So it's been amazing. And our ability to put food on the table and to do a Christmas meal is only possible because of the generosity of Australians. And we are just the conduit between the generosity of Australia and the people in need, and we can't say thank you enough.
Look, so many people are struggling at home, and I know that they want to be able to help. So if they aren't in a position to maybe make a financial donation, what other ways can they contribute?
Oh, look, you can always drop into our centres and give the gift of food, tin food, and, go grocery shopping and maybe just take it into the local salvos and drop it off, because those essential food items that we're able to give means the difference of a family putting food on the table for their kids that they may not otherwise have been able to do. So that's really, really important.
And what kind of feedback are you hearing from the families that have been helped through this? I'm sure it's really made their Christmas.
Yeah, absolutely. We've seen mums and dads just overwhelmed with tears of just joy to see what they've been donated, get hampers and food. It's just been amazing. And they come into our centres thinking that, maybe they're just going to get a little bit. And the generosity of Australia has been so amazing. And we've had beautiful hampers to give to families all around Australia. It's just been overwhelming. And for our volunteers, it's one of those real joys at Christmas time.
Oh, that's beautiful to hear. Speaking of this cost of living crisis, I mentioned in the introduction to our interview, so many more Australians than ever are seeking support services. Have you noticed an increase at the Salvation Army with people seeking support?
Yeah, absolutely. 1 in 10 Australians say that they need to reach out to a charity just to get through Christmas. So that's significant. And of those, half of those have never used a charity before. And we're definitely seeing that people coming through our doors that maybe were once donors are now recipients of the services that we provide. And, that's a really startling thing to see, that people who have never reached out to charity are coming to us. And for some people, that's quite a humbling experience. And sometimes it comes with a little bit of shame, but our volunteers and our local salvos have just embraced people, just love and joy, just saying, it's okay, we're going to get you through this.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time, Andrew. I'm going to have to cut you off there. And thank you everyone at home for your company tonight. The Bolt Report is next.